Hi, I'm David Cronenberg, the writer, producer, director of eXistenZ, and I'll try to give you a little bit of a guided tour to some of the many aspects of the movie. There's a tendency, I think, in movies now to use the sort of TV style of opening credits, which is that most of them are come over the first scene in the movie. To me, that feels like TV, because that was always TV style, because they were always pushed for time and they would never be able to give you a sort of opening credits sequence. The movies that I saw as a kid usually had very long, elaborate opening credit sequences. Saul Bass and a lot of famous graphics and producers were involved in those. And I always thought it actually was a good idea to give the audience a kind of a vestibule, a kind of an anteroom to take them from the street and into the theater and then into your movie, rather than just hitting you hard with the movie right away. There are reasons that might be a good idea for certain kinds of films, but in my movies I'm always trying to create an ambience, a dreamlike ambience, and a kind of a hypnotic, suggestive atmosphere. I'm really creating a little ecosphere with its own, like a little planet with its own ecosystem and its own dynamics and its own chemistry. And so that's what I'm trying to do with an opening title sequence. And in this particular case, it took us a few tries to come up with the style and the tone of these credits. They obviously do relate very strongly to the movie, both in terms of the textures and the colors, and also the suggestion of animal tissues and cell structures and so on, the biology of the film, because the film's imagery is very biocentric, let's say. And of course the music as well. I mean, there's always a collaboration between the composer, who is almost always, in my case, Howard Shore, and the people who are designing the credits. We all talk together and try to come up with something that will interweave the music and the visuals of the credit sequence, and even the rhythm of the way that the names come up and fade away. Something that will take you into the film and prepare you for the film and put you into the space of the movie.
eXistenZ, written like this, one word.
By its very nature, this opening sequence is somewhat theatrical in the literal sense of the word. That is to say, you have a stage and you have performers on the stage in this scene. And I didn't want to really shy away from that. I wanted to play that to the full, even though it's in some ways maybe an anti-cinematic way to open a movie. But because of the subject of the film and the concept of gameplay, where there are rules and it's a sort of a consensual kind of world that you end up going into, consensual in the sense that everybody agrees that it's an artificial world where there are rules and it'll only work if everything's outlined. You have basically here a sort of he's a teacher who is he's educating you as to the rules of the game. And although this isn't obvious necessarily to someone who's seeing the movie for the first time, it was very definitely on my mind when I was writing the script. And I kind of like the anti-cinematic nature of it, even though some people were kind of surprised by it.
The world of games is in a kind of a trance. People are programmed to accept so little.
The number of chairs and the number of participants on the stage has been pointed out to me that there are 12, and some people have suggested that this means that this is obviously a reference to the Last Supper, I'm not kidding. And that, and I have to say that the reason that there are 12 is because we originally, I think, had 16 chairs on this stage, and it was too crowded, and we finally found visually something that seemed to work. It wasn't certainly intentional that there be this, significant dozen. And although I did like the idea that some people had that because this is a church that we're in, we find this out a little bit later, but of course it looks like a church, and there are pews, that really game playing has become the new religion, and that was the sort of connection between the church, the Last Supper, and the world of eXistenZ, the game. I wasn't being that heavy about it, but it kind of tickled me that someone was inventive enough to put that together and felt the legitimacy of it. So I wouldn't argue with it on the level of critical invention.
These games,
Our assistants will then help you to port your pod into your bioports using antenna researchers.
The ski boot that Jennifer uses to carry around this critical sort of organic game playing module, the game pod. Originally in the script I had described it as resembling a ski boot. In other words, it was a specific container designed to fit tightly around the pod to protect it. And we got a couple of ski boots in order to look at their texture and to see the way that the clips clasped onto them and so on. And we did design and build several prototypes for the game pod holder, which we see a lot because Allegra Geller is always carrying it around when she's on the run. And none of them was as pretty or as striking as the ski boot itself that we had as a model. And finally I said, instead of it looking like a ski boot, let's have it be a ski boot. There already was in the script a reference to skiing, which we'll connect with later. And it just suddenly seemed, it was one of those moments where it just seemed so odd and so perfect and so oblique that, that's why we suddenly had a ski boot that is used as a game pod container. It was convenient for us that the umbi cords, the umbilical cord connectors to the game pods, had to be connected for the game pod to work in terms of the story, because it also meant that in terms of special effects, it was a very easy way to animate the game pods. We could put wires and cables and electrical wires through the umbi cord to the game pods. So that was sort of a solution that presented itself without much effort. And this sort of old game pod that our young would-be assassin is pulling out of his bag here. It was one of the first studies for the game pod, and I felt it was still a little too much on the mechanical end of things of the spectrum. We hadn't really gotten to the full organic nature of the final game pod, which you can see here. And so, but I thought the study that we did was perfect to be the sort of earlier iteration of this game pod.
There might be more.
This is the first scene in which there's a little bit of CGI, computer animation, on the blood of a young man being shot on the ground, and also the hit to Jennifer's shoulder. Because of the proximity of Jennifer's face to the squib, which is a small explosive device, we had to use a very low-level squib, and the blood that was that was pushed out of the blood pack was not really very strong, so we actually enhanced it using a computer. It's the first time I've ever done any computer stuff within a film. There's a lot more of it in this movie as well, but those were sort of the first effects in terms of chronology in this movie that you can see that our computer generated, even though they're so organically part of the movie that you don't notice them. And I think this is, of course, going to happen more and more with movies now. Most movies are going to be a blend of animation, computer animation, and live action, even though they might not look like it. Here we have something that most people do notice, which is that the background of the driving scenes are done with a rear screen projection, which is also a technique that I've actually never used in a movie before. It's a very, very old technique, and the machines that we were using were in fact very old. We used it for two reasons. One was stylistic, of course. I wanted to suggest, without being too obvious about it, that there was something artificial about the world that we're seeing even now, even though in terms of story this is the basic real world. Later on, of course, you find out that it is not really the real world at all. This is also part of a game. But I wanted to suggest that by using not really a computer technique at all, but a very old movie technique, an honorable old movie technique. Hitchcock used it a lot because he hated to go outside of the studios and into the streets in his later career because he didn't like losing the control that represents. He wanted to be all totally controlled in the studio. And that's the second reason that I wanted to use it too, is that to do a very long dialogue sequence in a moving vehicle at night, trying to light miles of roadway. We really didn't have the budget for that. So we used rear screen projection.
You're not armed. They told me you're my security, but you have no weaponry.
Who told you that?
Rear screen projection requires the shooting of what are called plates, but they're really not. I mean, it's really you go out and you shoot footage from a moving vehicle that you will then use to project behind your picture vehicle, which is just being rocked by grips in the studio to give it motion. Using 2x4s, it's pretty primitive, but it's effective. And it does give it that kind of not quite real feeling that I wanted for this scene.
So we can have an intimate moment together.
Now here, of course, we're no longer using rear projection. This is being shot on a real road.
Come on, if you're gonna do it, do it.
Okay.
There was, in fact, a huge electrical storm brewing. This took us a very long time to shoot because we had to keep stopping and bringing our gaffers and our lighting grips down from their towers where the lights were placed because of the danger of them being struck by lightning. So it took quite a long time to shoot this fairly simple scene.
What?
A lot of people have asked me how I came up with the idea of this, what we eventually called the gristle gun, or the bone gun. And although it does feature in a very large way in the film to come, but it came to me from logic to begin with, even though it seems anything but logical. If you are going to create a weapon that can get past metal and synthetics detectors, the weapon would have to be made of organic material, organic tissue. And once you accept that as a premise, the rest really follows very simply. You know, the idea, for example, what is there in the human body or an animal body that's hard enough to be a bullet? You could have bone, but of course teeth is very convenient. Teeth are make a very, in terms of their size and shape and so on, are a very obvious kind of possible projectile. So for me it was all logic and very straightforward, and then finally became quite grotesque and fantastic, which is a kind of arc that I love, and it came very beautifully with the concept of the gristle gun. Here we see the beginning of a motif that follows in the film, the word motel, written on the motel, very simply, is most of the things in this movie are labeled. And that is part of the game pack idea, the idea that everything in the film is actually generic and not specific. You just saw Perky Pats. You saw a paper bag that said Perky Pats on it. That's really my homage to Philip K. Dick. Perky Pats figures very strongly in a book of his called The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, one of his best books. And since Philip Dick was almost always working with the theme of alternate realities and who controls those realities, I really felt that I owed him a nod for the way that he has kind of formed those concepts in me, in my reading of Philip Dick. And so, I could almost have dedicated this film to him, but I have included this little homage, the Perky Pats bag, for those who know Philip Dick's work. There it is again.
I think we owe it to Antenna to let them know you're all right. And to get them to send somebody to help you who knows what he's doing. Because I can't just keep doing this, whatever it is, forever. Not having any idea when it's going. Hey!
Now this scene, of course, is the introduction of a major concept in the film, and the structure is a little strange because, of course, we've seen bioports, sort of. We've sort of gotten a suggestion that the people in the opening scene in the church were kind of linked together by these umbilical cords. But I decided not to shoot scenes of them being plugged in. In the original script, I had a long kind of a montage scene in which we saw how that all worked, how the umbi cords plugged into the game pods and so on. And then when I started to think about the way I wanted to shoot the film, I decided that it would be much more interesting to reveal the mechanisms of bioports and so on in this scene where our two main characters are involved and where it's much more intimate and there's much more kind of an emotional investment for each of them and hopefully the audience as well in the concept of a bioport and having a bioport inserted in your spine and so on, and the fear that might entail. So it's really kind of mysterious for the audience as to what's going on until this scene and the next scene unfold. It would have been quite different had I shown those mechanisms in the first scene, but I always thought that this was a much better way to do it, even though a little less traditional in terms of linear sort of revealing of important plot details.
When those umbi cords got ripped out of her, just as the game architecture was being downloaded from her to all those slave pods. That's a very vulnerable time for her. She could be crying out for help right here, right now. The only way I can tell if the game's not...
The emotional connection of the creator to the thing being created, of course, is the theme of this part of the scene. And I think most filmmakers and most artists can relate to it. It's a complex relationship that you have. It's very odd for me, in fact, to be watching this movie again. I haven't seen it for probably half a year. And in some ways I can't relate to it as a movie, of course, because it's almost a documentary for me of how I was feeling the day that we were shooting, and I remember everything that was surrounding the scenes, outside the scene, where we were, the difficulties of the effects and so on. So there's even more that it could be said about the relationship of Allegra Geller to her game pod that is in a metaphorical way autobiographical for me or for any artist, I would think. Here we go back to the labeled locations motif, the country gas station. This usually gets quite a big laugh. because of where it comes. And once again, labels.
You could check your bioport plugs.
What? Spark plugs?
You heard me. My friend here has a bio.
Willem Dafoe is an actor that I wanted to work with for a long, long time, and I was very excited when he wanted to play this role. I wasn't sure it was big enough for him. I mean, obviously he's played the lead in a lot of big movies, but he's a serious actor and a lovely guy, and we had a tremendous amount of fun doing this.
Sure you do.
Picking up the idea of the Allegra as an artist, because I do portray her in this movie as an accepted artist. That is to say, game designers in this world of the movie are artists and recognized as such. There's an element of the seductive, the seducer in any artist. I mean, it's something that is part of the game. That is, you are trying to seduce your audience. You are trying to. There's a sense, of course, in which an actor is also doing the same thing. Actors want to be, there's a sense in which you're seducing them into believing in your character, but there is a sexual element and an element of attraction, an element of fascination and charm. And so I have Allegra being both the sort of the director and the actor of this, of her game. And on both levels, she is a seducer. She is a charmer. She is a hypnotist, and so she's very strongly seductive throughout the whole movie. Not just sexually, but in terms of freedom. I mean, she offers, which we'll see very soon, what she's offering to Peichel, who is very inhibited. It's freedom. She's offering him freedom and liberation, which is another, that's part of her seduction. And that's part of the sexuality of it, but it's also beyond sexuality as well. So that was very strongly part of the way that I saw Allegra as the archetype of the artist, who is a bit of a magician, a bit of a con man or woman, and a bit of a seducer as well, successful or not. It's the attempt is always being made. And so I certainly, that's the way I feel it to be for myself. Now, this is a scene which perhaps is mysterious the first time you see it, and then once you understand the movie is very, very straightforward. Here is a woman looking at her creation. She has created this world, and she is admiring the completeness of it, the textures of it, the sounds of it, the smell of it. My God, the gas, actually, you can actually smell it. And it's a created world. Of course, the first time you see this movie, you don't really know that. But you might be suspecting it. And that is part of, that is really what's going on in this scene. And as I say, it's kind of mysterious the first time through. But even for her, because this world that she's created is not totally controlled and not totally manipulated by her, there are many surprises in it even for her. And certainly, once again, for any artist, you really want that to be true. You want what you create to be an organic living thing, even if it's a monster with two heads. You want it to take on a life of its own, to the extent that it can surprise you, that it can do things to you and take off in a direction that you didn't anticipate. Maybe you don't even want, but you can't stop the thing that you've created from going there. And so that's really also, once again, how I see the relationship between Allegra and the worlds that she creates and the movie that I've made.
How many have you done?
3. Well, you'll be...
A lot of people have commented on the homosexual undertones, or perhaps I should say overtones, of this scene and the one coming up between Gas and Peichel. And some people actually asked me if I noticed that myself. Obviously, this movie, although it's fairly chaste in terms of actual nudity or sexuality of the normal kind, is on another level quite obscene in a metaphorical way, in that it has many, many metaphorical references to all kinds of sexuality. And so in one sense there's sex happening in every scene, even though it's not what most people consider to be sex. So the answer is yes, I think I was pretty aware of most of the sexuality in the movie, and I believe that our actors were as well. I'll get more specific soon. This is, of course, where Allegra is really seducing Peichel in a non-sexual way, or not directly, in terms of offering him liberation from what he, in his heart, knows is his cage, that, as she says, is of his own making. And this scene was, especially by some very militant gay critics in France, was seen absolutely as a homosexual rape scene. I said, why is it rape? Because it is consensual. I mean, it is, Peichel finally agrees to it, so it's not exactly rape, but certainly there is that element here that's pretty blatant, I would say.
Epidural. Just like when you have a baby. Kind of like instant paralysis from the waist down. That's why it didn't hurt you. It'll wear off in no time.
Once again, this scene is part of the unfolding of the mechanism of how the pods and the umbicores and the bioports work. All of this very critical to the way the movie works, and also the metaphorical value of the movie. And here's really the first look we get at an actual bioport. Once again, I realized that if I had already shown many of these in the first scene when they were being set up for the game players on stage, that this scene wouldn't have nearly the impact that it has now as these things are being revealed. The downside of it is that the audience is a bit confused for the first 15 minutes of the film.
It's an instant-on world, isn't it?
Jennifer and Jude had a wonderful working relationship while we were doing this movie, and you can really see how much they love to play with each other and explore all the subtleties and the nuances of all the dialogue and the physical play as well. It's something you always hope for, that the chemistry between your leads is going to work, and yet, of course, most of the time, they've never met each other. You have no idea what's going to happen on the set, and under the pressures that the set brings and so on. Well, they just were fantastic for me to work with, but also for each other. And they really played well. Just that gesture of Jennifer's, which was certainly not scripted and not asked for by me, it was completely her understanding of the scene. That is to say, Peichel is worried about orifices leading into the body, and she's showing him a mouth, which is exactly the same thing. With no words, she just did that. It was just such a lovely moment. The garage that we were shooting in was an actual location, not a set, although we did put a lot of our own stuff in it, but it had a fantastic patina of, I think, over 40 years of being a garage that it would have been beyond our budget to create it.
I can't believe it. You blew my pod! You must have neural
When the pod kind of shrivels up and sparks, that is once again another scene where computer-generated imagery has been used to enhance something that was shot on set. The pod did curl up a bit on the set, and it did spark, but some of the smoke and some of the light within it and a few other things were added after the fact in the computer. I was somewhat paranoid about the way shots would look coming out of the computer, of course, because you're intercutting them with shots that have not gone in and out of computer. And in fact, I think it is a little bit like the telepods in my movie The Fly. That is to say, you go in and out of the telepods and you come out and you look the same, but there's something that's not quite the same. I feel that about images that have gone into the computer and come out. They're not quite the same. I think, in other words, we're not 100% there at the point where the images are totally convincing to a very critical eye as being original film stock. They are changed subtly. Some definitions, some contrast changes, and so on. I must admit that as a moviegoer, when I'm watching movies on the screen that have been gone in and out of the computer, I can't really tell most of the time. But for me, as a director, I was always a little bit wary of, I was very, very critical of the way the shots looked when they came out of the computer and were recorded back onto film. There is a subtle difference that I'm sure that in time will be lost, and you'll be able to put things in and out of the computer and have them be completely undetectable. But right at the moment, I can detect them, and so can my cameraman.
What are you talking about?
You know what I'm talking about. It's all over the countryside. $5 million for her dead body. No questions asked.
She changed your life.
Yep. And now I'm gonna change hers.
Why did you install a bad port into me?
Seems there's a big bonus for killing Allegra Geller's latest game, or whatever it is.
Now, of course, there is a reference here and to, the Salman Rushdie situation where he had a price on his head because of a book that he had written, The Satanic Verses. And that sort of sub-theme runs all through the movie, even though it's not the primary theme of the movie. I mean, it was one of the first things I thought of when I started to write the film, was exactly that, the idea of the relationship of a creator to what he's created and the way that can come back to haunt you. It was something that William Burroughs was very obsessed with. The idea that what you create is a living thing that can at the worst, kill you. And it was in my mind, even though it's not sort of the top layer of what's going on in this movie. But the idea of an artist on the run, having been condemned to death, is certainly a strong consideration in this movie. The idea that you could have a bounty on your head, placed on your head, and no matter where you went, there would be people who might be trying to collect it. That was certainly the shocking thing about the Salman Rushdie situation. I don't think it certainly had never happened in such a universally publicized way before.
Actually kill you.
I've never been more popular.
We're once again driving with rear projection background.
I've got to get this pod fixed.
Now here's where we pick up the ski boot theme, in that we're going to a ski chalet and skiing is mentioned, and sort of a suggestion that in this world of ours, which for the audience at the moment is either slightly futuristic or perhaps is really just an alternate present, that people don't really do physical activities like ski. We don't ever come to grips with discussing what they do instead, but or whether there's a virtual skiing that's replaced real skiing.
Huge bug. It's got 2 heads.
It's not a bug. It's a mutated amphibian. It's a frog, salamander, lizard.
This is a completely computer-generated creature. We did 2 versions of it, one using puppetry, which we plan to enhance, and one that was completely computer-generated, and we ended up using the completely CGI one.
What happens if somebody comes up here and really wants to ski?
Come on, Michael. Nobody actually physically skis anymore. You know that.
No, don't use that. I'm bringing the sterile wash.
This is the introduction of Vinegar, the Curie Vinegar character, played by Ian Holm, whom I'd worked with first on Naked Lunch, and we got along very well and vowed to work again, and this was the again.
I'm so pleased and so astonished to see you here.
Carrie Vinegar, my bodyguard, Ted Peichel.
Hello. Sterile wash.
There are some strange shots in this movie. You'll see one coming up, which actually some people notice and have asked me about. It once again has to do with perhaps the idea that when you see the movie the second time, these things will become clear, but they might be a bit strange the first time.
But I don't know if they can do anything. It seems to be open season on me.
Well, you will be safe here, I assure you of that. I will contact Antenna right away and have them send some people over to come collect you.
No, Carrie, don't. You mustn't let anybody know that we're here. I can't be sure that Antenna is completely safe for me.
Here it comes. It's this shot, which doesn't seem to really mean anything, but it once again is the idea of examining the details of this created world, you know, the completeness of it and the sort of artistry of it, this strange, you know, this sort of kind of late 50s, early 60s chair and the texture of it and the way the hand touches it in the same way that in a video game these days people are very proud of the accuracy of the graphics and how many polygons are used for the movement of the human body and so on. And so really that was it's kind of exulting and reveling in the attention to detail of the creation of the game, and that's really what that is all about.
Peichel's bioport.
Really? That's what caused all the damage?
It was a flawed installation, my first.
Well...
Originally, the concept of the game pod was that it was kind of half organic, half electronic, and we actually did some designs trying to make that work. And suddenly, I realized that it was a confused concept, and it was much more exciting to me to have the game pods be animals, completely 100% animals, specifically designed for a specific purpose, but nonetheless 100% organic. And sort of free-range game pod we have here. And it was really while I was thinking about this scene during the shoot itself that I decided to shift that concept from one to the other. And that, of course, caused a lot of problems in the special effects, except that they were very enthusiastic about it because it was such a clean and direct kind of coming out of the fog kind of moment. So we had to scramble a bit to get things ready for the new version of the dissection scene, because of course this is a scene in which you really do get to examine how the pod works. Some people have said to me, why do you show these disgusting things? And I must say I can't understand that attitude. I mean, if someone said to me there was this amazing new creature that did things that no other creature had done before, I would want to know how it worked. I'd want to know its inner structure. That's the sort of junior biologist in me, I suppose. But I don't think it's any more strange than that. That kind of curiosity to me is the basis of all science and partly of all creativity. So I find it very natural. It comes very naturally to me. The moment when Jennifer puts her finger in Peichel's bioport, once again, the idea that she wets her finger first before she puts it in was completely Jennifer's idea. We didn't even talk about it. She just did it the first time we did a take, and I thought it was fantastic. And of course it has humorous sexual connotations as well. There it is. And here we went further with it here.
See? You're humming along already. Okay. eXistenZ. Only from Antenna. Here we go.
You got a bit of an unfair advantage, don't you? How can I possibly compete with the designer of the system?
Well, you could beat the guy that invented...
Another thing that changed during the shooting of the film, a major shift, was the idea that when we went into the game, it would be a kind of it would be done on set. It would not be, as it was originally suggested in the script, as some kind of a wonderful computer effect. because the more we experimented with the wonderful computer effects, the more bored I got and the more obvious they seemed. And ultimately, the transitions in and out of the game within the game, were done in a very simple sort of mise-en-scène way, which is to say it's through directing and editing and set design, as you've just seen, rather than doing some interesting kind of computer bubbling, blipping, mosaicing, solarizing kind of effect to show us going in and out of the game, which to me, those effects seem, while they might be startling the first time you see them, ultimately are used for 1 million commercials and 1 million movies, and your movie grows old very quickly when you've depended on, let's say, morphing, which was pretty effective in Terminator 2 and quite startling. And now when you see it, it's just old hat. I mean, it's just been used to death on just everything from, you know, credit card ads to you name it. So I thought I would just do it the simple, austere way. And it seems to work. I must say that people seem to find it very effective. And as I say, it couldn't be more simple.
The future, Michael.
Here we have very subtle clothing and hairstyling details to help us make the change in the characters. Pikel's collar is up, his top is slightly different, his hair is different, her hair is different, her clothes are different, but in very subtle ways and very related to what you saw before. So it might well be that you don't notice it consciously, but just the sort of confidence and the looks of Pikel change here. He's a little more Elvis here. And it's perhaps a good time to mention that a lot of what was done in this film to suggest an alternate present, let's say, or a very close future, was done by subtraction. That is to say, we took things away. And it was things that I just didn't want to deal with at first, and then I thought, I think it's better if we don't have them. So, for example, in the motel room, you don't have a television set and you don't have a telephone. Because except for the pink phone, there are no phones in the movie. There are no television sets. In fact, there are no screens, no computers of any kind, which might seem odd for a movie that's about gaming. In fact, there are no running shoes in the movie, and there are no suits and ties, and there are no patterns on the clothes either. We don't have any stripes, polka dots. It's all very simple, flat kind of colors relatively. Here's a good example right there. It was an intuitive thing at first, but I can justify it by feeling, I mean, it gives a bit of sense of the blockiness of current gaming. That is to say, if you're going to animate somebody who has a striped shirt, it's going to take a lot more computer memory to move that shirt through 3 dimensions than if it were a simple plain color. And there's this kind of blockiness to computer game design at the moment, which of course is changing as memory strength and computer chip strength changes. But I just felt it would give the film a strange kind of not quite cartoony look, because it isn't that, but that wasn't obvious. And so also we don't have any jewelry, no watches, no earrings, no necklaces, and so on. It gives the movie a strangely austere look, but it's very hard to pin down if someone isn't pointing the details out to you.
We're here, Darcy Nader, and that's all that matters.
Of course, here's a critical moment in the discussion of games characters. And of course, it opens the way for me to make many comments at a distance about performers and actors in movies and directing them and writing them.
Micropods to download your new identities.
There's a sense in which the whole movie is about performing.
These industry standard bioports that you mentioned installed.
Yes, of course, we both have.
Now, Bob Silverman, the the third character in this scene is an actor who's been in more of my movies than any other single actor. We've worked together many times, and he's a wonderful actor with an amazing presence. And he was the one. He came up with this sort of, what does the character actually do when he's in a game loop, is really Bob. This is definitely Bob's sort of interpretation of that, and it's very funny and very astute, and it works very well.
Port in. And this will tell you all you need to know. For now. I'm going to leave while you two finish up here, because it wouldn't be good for us all to be seen together.
This little room was actually a problem. There's a lot of screen time in this room, and it is not a set. It's an actual back room. We had to move those doors around a lot just to be able to get lighting in and crew members in and so on. And it was quite a little bit of a mini nightmare to shoot there. And part of it came from the fact that I had promised to shoot these scenes, promised to Carol Spear, the production designer, to shoot these scenes in the game store itself. And then when it came time to make that work, I couldn't make it work. I really felt they had to be hidden and put somewhere else, which is as it was written in the script. But we actually tried to save money by cutting this not the scene, but the location for the scene, and putting it in the store. And then finally I said, you know, I can't do it. I'm going to have to do it in this storeroom. Well, the way those walls look with the flaking paint and so on is actually, and the sort of blistering of paint on the bricks is actually the way that room looks. It was a found art as far as I was concerned, but it did cause some consternation on the part of various crew members, and of course Carol was upset because she, of course, knew that she could design a wonderful room that would be a lot easier to shoot in for us. Directors are there to make trouble for everybody. The whole orientation of the movie is body technology. For me, technology is not something that comes from somewhere else. It is first of all an extension of the human body, the way the phone is an extension of the ear and the mouth and so on. And I do feel that we absorb technology into our bodies. I mean, the body chemistry we have now is completely not the same as of human beings 1,000 years ago, quite different. So that idea of the absorption of technology into the body and the extension of the body through technology is the way that I see it, which is why all the technology in this movie is organic. It's not hard and glistening and plastic and shiny. So that's the sort of concept of it. In terms of the characters, Allegra has promised Peichel liberation of many kinds, and if he plays the game. And one of the kinds is sexual liberation, and another kind is that he will come to terms with his difficulties with his own body, with his own existence as a bodily thing, with bodily functions. And so this is basically Allegra's therapy for Peichel on that level. This whole scene. And of course we see at this particular moment he's still having trouble, and having, I think, legitimately, he's saying, if this is not our real bodies, how do we know that our bodies are safe and so on? So it's a struggle for him. But at the same time, she's using his own innate sexuality and his own sort of game persona, which, as I say, is a little more Elvis, a little more loose and sexy, to draw the real Peichel along in his development as a kind of a less inhibited, less repressed person. Of course, it doesn't work easily, because if it did, there wouldn't be any drama involved. And now here's a scene, once again, done very simply, that is a transition within a transition. We're already in the game, and now we're going to another part of the game from here. And once again, it's a very simple matter of choreography of the actors and editing and production design and so on, and acting, of course. And really, this is the crux of the transition here. His hand on her breast and his hand on this strange creature. And the sound really helps here as well, because it's the sound of the trout farm, which is a very specific sound, very cluttered and noisy and with a lot of machinery and people's voices and so on, doesn't come up for the first shot of Peichel in the trout farm. We're still hearing, it's a sound overlap from the sort of the storage room in the back of the game store. And that kind of helps you ease over that cut into the trout farm transition. And once again, it's something that we considered doing fancy computer effects and so on. And by this time, we were very committed to the idea of doing these transitions in a very simple, direct, innately cinematic way.
From outside, you would never guess it's now factory for making.
And here you see Peichel in the throes of trying to be another character, or trying to integrate his what he perceives to be his own character with the compulsions of a game character. And of course, there are a lot of resonances here in terms of the way people, I think, play roles in society. I mean, it's an obvious thing. It's the idea that it's a context often forces us to play a role that we're not comfortable in, that we don't feel is the real us. But we're forced nonetheless to play it, and try to play it well or awkwardly as we choose. But so there's that level as well. The whole idea, as I say, of performing in society and in life, and in terms of forming an identity. An identity is not something that is given to us. It is something that takes a lot of will, creative human effort to come up with. And it's created over an entire lifetime, involving interaction with other people and with your body, of course, and with the society and the context you find yourself in. And this is kind of playing this movie. The movie plays games with those concepts here.
In the forest, everyone knows where it is. Just ask.
And the idea that if you don't say the right words at the right time in the right contexts, certain things will be forever hidden from you or closed to you in society.
All right. I'll do that.
And once again, we're playing with the idea in the movie of things that become other things. Transformation, that is, the trout farm was something, is now something that it wasn't before, and will eventually become yet something else. And it's sort of just the idea of transitioning and transforming, and what happens to your identity when you transform. This is a wonderful example of the kind of production design that Carol and her people come up with, because the shell of this place existed, and it was beautiful, and it was right near our production offices. This Quonset hut with this beautiful wood frame structure, but everything in it is Carol. There's a moment here when we think that perhaps Allegra herself is a game character. There's just that moment when she plays with that. And of course, by the end of the movie, you realize that it's totally true and that it wasn't a game at all. But you don't know that the first time through.
What the guy in the assembly line say to you?
Can you believe the game version of your pod
Sick. So unconvincing. I mean, using mutated animal...
The nightmare version of a game pod, which in itself for some people is a nightmare, so I guess it's a layering of nightmares here.
Absurd. Grotesque.
But I can imagine that someone who would be willing to have laser surgery on his eyes would be also willing to have a bioport inserted if it meant that you could have game playing and other experiences that were that had never been experienced by any humans before. I don't think it's so far-fetched. I think you get a lot of takers for the bioports. This was a very tricky shot, even though it looks pretty simple. It is my first blue screen shot, and it involves motion control, and yet what it is absolutely dead simple. And there, of course, we have the labeling again, the Chinese restaurant. But in fact, these two places, the trout farm and the Chinese restaurant, were actually about 50 miles apart, and I needed to bring them together for the movie to work in that shot. So a lot of technology went into a shot that no one will notice the technology in.
Shall I bring it for everyone?
We want a special. Did you hear me, Chinese waiter?
This was a location that actually everybody loved. It's very hard to understand sometimes why some locations make people feel relaxed and happy and other ones cause tension and sort of disruption. This was not a set 100%. It was actually part of, once again, our production offices, which were at a demilitarized Air Force base, and the textures in this place were fantastic. I found myself photographing them when I had some downtime, and ultimately we threw the wardrobe department out of this space and turned it into this set. There's a lot of detailing that Carol and her people did, but those pipes in the background, for example, were really there, and the flaking of the walls and the windows and so on, and the things that are specific to China and to Chinese restaurant, of course, are Carol and her people. But people, we love shooting on this set, which is a good thing because there was a lot of time spent on it. Even though, for example, for my cameraman Peter, he, there's not the ceilings are very low, which most cameramen don't like because it means they're very limited in the way they can use their lights. But it just seemed to work.
eXistenZ is paused!
Now, here it's conceivable that the audience might feel the same way as Peichel at this point, or perhaps not if they're into the playfulness of it, but the idea that he feels too vulnerable, he feels too out of control, he feels too pre-programmed in a way, and is struggling. He's not really able to let go and be in the game. He's not really able to give himself up to the sort of the creative act of game playing, and feels very unstable in terms of his own identity and his own emotional stability. And certainly, I mean, it's an experience that many people have. You're in a context, and then you go, let's say, traveling, and suddenly you don't have the family, the friends, the recognition for, let's say, the things that you're known for, or whether you're a kid and you're a football player and you're a star or whatever. You suddenly have no context for people to relate to you, and you have to start from scratch in a foreign country, let's say, a strange place, recreating yourself, letting people know who you are. And so this is really just a kind of distilled version of that. And really beyond it, I'm suggesting that all reality is virtual, that all reality requires great effort of human creative will to make it work to make it viable. I actually do think that the first thing you do in the morning when you wake up, before you have your breakfast and before you have your brush your teeth, is you recreate yourself. You recreate reality. You have to reconstruct an identity for yourself. Remember who you are, what you are, where you are, why you're there, what your social structure is that you're finding yourself in. Because it's not an absolute. It's not something that is absolutely solid. People want it to be solid, and in a way to function, they have to pretend that it's solid, but it isn't really. And that's also part of the theme of the movie. And to that extent, Peichel represents, every man, and he represents the audience in this film, as he's sort of taken along by Allegra and educated and shaken, having his sort of understanding of what he is and what identity is shaken by her.
Hope you enjoy it very much.
Look, it's our two-headed friend. Doesn't look too healthy.
When I was writing this scene the first time through, I really didn't know what was going to happen. And suddenly it was, you always hope as a writer for moments like this. It's kind of like automatic writing. Suddenly it takes over whatever it is, the thing that you've created. I had no idea when I started this what the special would be, and certainly when I invented the gristle gun at the beginning of the movie, for the reasons that I've said, very practical, pragmatic ones to begin with, I had no idea where it would lead me. But you get a feeling when you create something that's juicy, that it has lots of resonances and implications and metaphorical value, that sooner or later it will reveal itself to you as you're writing. And this was one of these moments when Peichel picked up this first piece of the special. I really didn't know what was going to happen when I was writing it, and then it all just sort of flowed on its own.
I find this disgusting, but I can't help myself.
And I suppose it replicates in a way the process whereby things that happen in our daily lives come to us in our dreams in a transformed way, and then when we come out of those dreams, those things are transformed for us in our daily lives. They now have different meaning. They have resonances from our dreams that they didn't have before the dream, and that is part of the mechanism, I think, that made this happen for me as when I was writing this part of the script. It, of course, also alludes, amongst many other things, to that kind of organic technology that I was talking about, the idea that I don't think we actually ever get very far away from our bodies, despite the abstract philosophy that we can develop and the very glistening, hard surface technology that we develop. For me, the first fact of human existence is the human body. And although we have many reasons for wanting to deny that, primarily, of course, is mortality, the prime reason being mortality, despite that denial, it always comes back to the body eventually. And so I feel that that's why my movies in general tend to be extremely body-oriented. I couldn't articulate it when I began to make movies, but gradually I began to be able to, be aware of it on a more intellectual level.
Do you have that bridge in real life?
Metaphor is a very hard thing to achieve in a movie. It's one of the foundations of literary creation, but very hard to do in a movie. And it's one of the things that I find myself trying to do over and over again. That is to say, to find imagery that has metaphorical value, literally images that have several meanings, just as images. And the gristle gun is one of those.
Death. Demoness Allegra Geller.
That's not funny.
Sorry. But you know, I do feel the urge to kill someone here.
Who?
Now, there's a whole discussion, of course, that comes with this scene about violence and violence in the media, and it's a never-ending discussion. I think, if you believe, as I do, that in a sense all reality is virtual and is created, and it has huge human creative components, then it becomes an even more complex discussion. It's not as simple as kids not knowing the difference between reality and a television show. In fact, you're saying that the reality is as created a thing as the television show. And so there are discussions within discussions that are happening in a scene like this about those questions. But it's not, in this movie, a simple statement, which some people have wanted to see it as being. That is to say, things like video games make people less likely to be aware of the realities of violent acts and so on. It's not simple at all, and I don't think it's simple in the movie either. It might be considered a paradox here that a weapon could be wounded, and it's what we have just seen with the gun, the gristle gun bleeding. It seemed to me an obvious thing and a straightforward thing. If the gun, everything in the movie has an animus, everything is alive, everything is organic. So even the gun, which we've already established as organic, but because it's bone and sort of old flesh, you wouldn't expect it perhaps to be juicy and alive. But I'm showing you that even the gun is alive in this. It is invested with creative will, I suppose. This is a little like Schopenhauer, the world as will and representation, in which he discusses the fact that the world is sustained by will. And I think, in a way, you could consider this movie a kind of a treatise on Schopenhauer in that sense, both in terms of the imagery and the sense of everything being animated in the true sense of meaning alive.
It was very revealing.
Yes, it certainly was for me. You both passed a little test with flying colors.
Why did the Chinese waiter have to die?
Waiter. Yes, many things spoken when people are relaxing and eating.
My only appearance as an actor in this movie is a very quick one. You'll see it right here. Those are my hands, and that's me chopping it. Because shots like that are usually done. They're so time-consuming, you really don't want to have a whole huge crew standing around while you spend 3 hours trying to get one shot like that. So, in fact, that was done long after we actually shot that scene. And Don McKellar was off directing one of his own movies, I think, by that time. And so I stood in for him and did the handwork myself.
We originally were raising these mutant creatures for the newest...
Many people commented to me that this scene in particular reminded them of the computer games Myst and Riven, its sequel. That the sort of just the imagery of this scene, and I wasn't really consciously trying to reproduce that, but it pleased me nonetheless that there were those connections. Those games are really quite beautiful and have a very distinctive artistic style, and are among the games that convince me that eventually computer games will be an art form unto themselves. It's the whole discussion about whether a game can be art is an interesting one. Once again, it leads you into all kinds of paradoxes, and the whole question of whether something like a game, which in a sense is democratic because all the players have input into it. It's not the old understanding of art as sort of one person or a group of people with vision who lead the audience to some place that they've never been before and couldn't be before, couldn't go by themselves. Could a game be art? Of course, I'm assuming that it is. I've assumed that as a proposition in this movie, but it is an interesting discussion to have. There's certainly games, as I say, like Myst, which are art in the graphic sense, but perhaps not in the fullest sense, and that's, once again, a long and interesting discussion.
Hugo Carlyle. Is Darcy Nader here?
He's in the back.
You want him?
Here we go back into the dreaded back room.
You shouldn't have killed the Chinese waiter.
Why not?
He was your contact at the trout farm. Damn good man.
And so there are links as from dream to reality to dream to reality, and one in this movie, and one of the links, of course, is the gristle gun. Variations on the game pod are another one, and sort of bioports are others. But the gun is a kind of a sort of a token or an icon that seems to float from reality to reality, slightly changed, and its function slightly changed, but it keeps tying things together in a strange way. And that was not something that I initially intended when I first came up with the gun for the first scene of the movie. But it just sort of forced itself on me in a way that, as a writer, you know not to resist. It's so compelling, and it seems to work so well, even if you can't articulate why it works. You just don't fight it. You know you have to use it. And as we'll see, the gun comes back a few times more.
Anxiety.
I don't like it here. I don't know what's going on. We're both...
Here we have really a kind of this is basically existentialist propaganda you're hearing here. This is really Martin Heidegger, the German existentialist philosopher, although he didn't like the term existentialist himself. He would have rejected that. It's basically, this is almost pure Heideggerian descriptions of life as it is lived by humans on Earth. When you strip away all the facades and the fantasies and the false hopes, of course, when Allegra says it's a game everybody's playing, I'm meaning it's a game of life, and that's why we're all playing it, as Peichel has described it. We can see that the sort of the version of operating. It's these scenes in the trout farm, this part of the trout farm, where the assembly bays, where the pods are being kind of assembled. The nightmare pods. It is another sort of allusion to the kind of nightmare, daymare transformation, sort of duality. The idea that what happens in the day and is transformed in a dream to something that's darker and more malevolent and more sinister. Even though, so we see, even though once again it's a kind of a nightmare within a nightmare. These operating sequences where the surgery is done, where everything is dirty and unhygienic and kind of like images from Hieronymus Bosch in a sense. These scenes are once again referencing the concept of multiple realities, layers of realities, equivalent realities.
How long does it take for the infection to take hold?
No time at all.
And then you quietly pour it into all the other pods and spread the infection to them.
Oh, God.
What's happening?
Something's wrong.
I'm gonna import you now.
Oh, God, don't. That really hurts.
I'm gonna cut you free.
No, I'm afraid.
Now, a scene like this, which is on one level totally fantastic, what's going on, the idea of, the pods and the umbilical cords plugged into bioports and so on. But it has very, very basic human connections. I mean, this is the kind of scene that most people eventually have to play out in their lives. It's like a scene of a miscarriage or a scene of a wounding, or despite the fantasy element in this scene, it really plays like those scenes of horror that people end up having in their bathrooms. A place that is just sort of relatively innocuous until one day something like that happens, whether it's finding someone who's had a heart attack or wounded himself or committed suicide, or a wife who's had a miscarriage, or there are many levels that this scene plays on, and then you have this sort of comic character played by Don McKellar, which is, and it's definitely humorous. So it's a kind of a strange dramatic tension amongst those different levels playing out in these sequences, I think, which make it a kind of a disturbing, it's funny, but it's also kind of disturbing series of little sequences that string together in a very uncomfortable way.
There! To the demoness! Demoness!
I think we just lost the game.
Now, once again, this was not a simple transition scene to do, but cinematically, it's fairly simple. Once again, it's editing. It's creating a set that's a combination of two sets, and it's editing to show the transition from deep within the game to what we have considered so far to be our basic level of reality in the movie.
What's wrong?
It's here. It's happened. It's come back here with
You can play a pod with your foot as well as with your hand.
Brought what back? I can't understand what you're saying.
We brought the disease back with us. My pod is diseased. Oh, God. I'm really gonna lose it. I'm gonna lose my game.
And once again, this is a scene that on one level is fantastic because game pods don't really exist. But on many other levels, really strike very close to home, because anyone who has children or children who have pets, it's a kind of the emotional connections with things that we can relate to are very evident and very potent, I think, here.
What's in the needle?
Sporicide. Pods are susceptible to spore infections. It can work if you get it in time. Come on. Come on. Let me see your bioport.
What?
Let me see it.
What?
I know what happened. It's Kerry Vinegar, that bastard.
Vinegar?
He gave you a new bioport, didn't he?
Oh, God.
The idea here that something that you dream can come through into your what you consider to be your real life and affect it, and that there's something in the dream trying to tell you something is kind of, I mean, in a sense, it's the basis of Freudian dream psychology, for one thing. But it's also, I think, it has validity in terms of the creative act as well. If you think of the kind of little mini trance that you go into when you're writing a script, for example, and the way that themes develop and things poke through into the script from the life that you've been just living on the street, and then that what you've written alters the way you perceive that life when you go back to it. That's all being referenced here, and I think it's all very valid in terms of the way those mechanisms seem to work.
Michael, my pod's dying. I can't help it. There's nothing I can do for it.
The uprising has begun! The world is in flames! Let's go!
And here's one of those dream elements coming into reality in the person of Carla as Che Guevara.
Meat here has done its job!
I keep my game inside there. I can't let my game die. No! Wait!
Listen to me! Listen to me! I think we're still inside the game. I think your pod's out there somewhere safe. I think it's all right to let go of this one, this pod. It's not the real one.
The whole idea of interpenetrating realities is what this scene really brings to a head. That theme that really begins the movie. It all comes to a kind of compression point here, where all of the realities are kind of compressed together, and there are elements from all of them into each other. And some people were talking to me about the staticness of this so-called war scene, and of course the whole idea was that it's not realistic, and that it's not what people would do on the top of a hill with things blowing up all around them. It is very much a kind of half dream, half game, half reality, third reality construction. I've got too many halves happening here. And so it's not meant to be realistic. It's meant to be a kind of a background action scene, the way you get them in video games and computer games.
See what I mean? See the problem?
And of course, once again, the gristle gun, now brought to someone else by his dog.
My dog brought me this.
You didn't get here in time. My game is dead. You murdered my game!
No! I murdered your pod! Your game is healthy and happy!
No.
I replicated your pod's entire nervous system during our little surgical procedure at the chalet, complete with contents.
So just as there are many layers of reality, there are many possible layers of betrayal and treachery. And it really almost doesn't matter how much this makes sense. We understand that betrayal is involved, and characters shifting from one side to the other, and in fact becoming other characters.
United with your baby, you'll come over to us. Can you talk to her? It would be best for everyone.
This was, despite the fact that it's quite a long dialogue sequence among several people, this was really the most difficult action scene to construct for the movie because of the amount of the number of square feet involved. There's a lot of, we're seeing a lot of landscape here, which all requires lighting, and of course there's a lot of explosive devices and so on, which are dangerous and have to be really carefully modulated and monitored. But in fact, basically it's a sort of a series of dialogue scenes on top of a hill. So once again, it's a very odd kind of anti-cinematic structure which replicates the first scene in the movie in that way.
It was no accident that you and I ended up on the run together.
Not an accident.
No.
That's why you never had a bioport. You were one of them.
I still am one of them.
But you have a bioport now.
I made the bioport sacrifice to get close to you.
Why would you want to do that?
To understand what I have to kill.
And understand this. Understand I knew that you were my real assassin when you pointed the gun at me in the Chinese restaurant. And understand that you're dead.
Death to the demon, Ted! Michael!
Here's the final transition scene, once again done in a simple manner that gives a kind of surrealistic tone to this particular transition, but really just on a simple cut, adding some things that are brought into the frame. The kind of tiara game device, and the kind of surreal blending of two sets, the church pews in the middle of this hilltop battle scene. And it's just simply cutting that takes you there. And of course sound effects and music, but all blending the same thing. And here it's really, I think in this shot and the one coming next of Jude Law, you can see that the acting here is fantastic already. They've totally transformed themselves without even a word, just by their inner energy that's there, that's different from what you've been seeing in those two characters from before. Wow. They're completely different in this scene. It's just a wonderfully subtle but very definite and powerful transition that's completely done by acting, a little bit of makeup and different hair and so on, but the way that those two characters transform in this scene is really quite wonderful, I think.
Are we gone? About 20 minutes.
God, it seemed like days. It's fantastic.
Just think about it, man. If you stayed your whole life...
There is one of the things that I read before I started to write the script, or while I was writing the script, was Pirandello's play, 6 Characters in Search of an Author. The idea of characters knowing that they're characters and wondering what they're supposed to play is certainly has strong connections with some of the things that I've been doing in this movie, vis-a-vis performing, acting, and social interaction. Social interaction as performance art.
I got knocked out of the game so soon.
It was fantastic how mean you were, really scary and crazy. I had a lot to do in that first scene at the church, but I thought the character was boring.
Well, no matter how boring you were, you still all get a certificate.
A certificate for helping us out here, and am I right about this, Merle? I think.
Yes, and that will entitle you to reserve one of the first batch of the eXistenZ by Pilgrimage game modules to hit the market at a seriously discounted price. You're gonna love it. Remember, it's written like this. Capital C.
Once again, the set here, it's the same basic set as in the beginning of the movie, but with subtle changes. Different paint, different banners and so on. A lot of little subtle details in terms of changing it. from the opening scene to let you know you're in an alternate reality here. Things have poked through from one to the other, but they're also subtly changed, as are all the characters here.
Head here, Mr. Peichel. He's obviously pretty good in a crisis, and when you're designing games, there's plenty of those.
I guess you could all tell that Peichel and I had a relationship prior to coming here. And we really do like to play together.
We do. But I'd just like to assure everybody here that Allegra wouldn't really...
Here we have one of the levels that have altered is, of course, the name of the game and the company that produced it. We have the game TranscenDence, presented to you by the company Pilgrimage. And Transcendence and Pilgrimage, of course, have a much more obvious religious significance than, let's say, eXistenZ by Antenna. So we're bringing it closer to the idea of the goals of religion, the idea of a pilgrimage, and the idea of a kind of a nirvana, of a transcendence of earthly concerns and worries, being provided by game playing and sort of the shift from religion to art, to entertainment, to what? It's a subtle suggestion, but it was deliberate that the sort of reality, the game reality that we come out to here, fits into the sort of church setting a lot more solidly than it did at the beginning of the movie.
Hi.
And, of course, the idea of martyrdom, which there's a hint of course, in the first attempted assassination of Allegra Geller, is continued here and more ferociously and more completely.
We've played your game now, so we can finally agree with the others that you are indeed the world's greatest game artist. We weren't sure before.
Oh, thanks so much.
Is Yevgeny nourished to be the first game designing martyr?
And to do to the human race.
What?
Yes. Don't you think the world's greatest game artist ought to be punished for the most effective deforming of reality?
I don't think this is very... Guys, can you come over here right now, please?
Once again, guns brought to someone by their dog.
Death to the demon, Yevgeny Nourish!
Death to Pilgrimage! Death!
So this pair really could be members of the Baader-Meinhof gang, the German terrorist group, or any number of Red Guards or familiar terrorist figures in terms of their intensity and their focus and their lack of human compassion.
No, you don't have to shoot me! Hey, tell me the truth. Are we still in a game?
I did shoot a version of this ending in which the Chinese waiter is shot by our revolutionary couple. People got very upset. I was kind of touched to see they really didn't want the Chinese waiter to die again. And after I thought about it, I thought that they were right. And my in the script initially, I didn't have him shot. And then when we were on the set, I thought, well, I could try it and see if it works, and I'll have it as a possibility. And I did try it, but it really didn't work. For some reason, it just unbalanced the ending of the movie, so it was much better to leave the whole thing as a question mark at the end, and so that's why we did that.